The Joining the Dots podcast focuses on the many challenges facing education and how different approaches and innovations are needed to meet those challenges.
Join co-hosts Matt Jessop and Kingsley as they have discussions with innovative educators, business leaders, policymakers, and other stakeholders, and guests looking at transforming the future of education.
Hello. Another episode, Joining the Dots podcast, and our luxury introduction there. But more importantly, fab to have Carla on the show today. Hi, Carla. Good to see you.
Hello. Nice to see you both. Yes.
And we've known each other for a while, but I think like many in the edu space, we all kind of communicate in a digital way and rarely and occasionally get the chance to drop in the same physical space. So we're not quite there in the physical space here, Carla. It's been a while since we've got together at BET, but this counts as second best. At least we can have a bit of a conversation and hopefully share some of your insights, because you have been working in the educational technology and AI space for a good while and are one of the people that are definitely on my list as those respected and trusted voices that have a very measured and strategic view of what's happening across the sector. I also have you on my list as one of the people that I always get FOMO because you're off doing really exciting things at events, and I keep thinking, I wish I could just go along and take Carla's suitcase for her and dip into that. But
I'll bear that in mind. Yes.
So let's kick things off. There's a huge conversation around AI at the moment and the implications in AI in education, good and bad, potential opportunities and threats. And at the same time, there's a conversation that maybe it's distracting us from some of the more fundamental things we need to be talking about within education, the curriculum. Where do you see as the sort of hot topics, the things that you think we should be focusing our conversation around at the moment, Carla?
Away from AI, I think we should really focus on kind of how can education really be the catalyst for kind of kids' potential. It's what it has meant to be forever. I mean, when it started as a kind of Prussian system of for the Industrial Revolution, you could argue that, you know, they needed people to comply and conform to standard to be, you know, suit the society. But we don't live in that world anymore. And now it's very much, you know, how do we make sure that kids can realize their potential so they can function or can thrive in their future? And I feel that for me, that's still the big, you know, $1 million question, because I don't think we're doing that at all. And I know Matt is already shaking his head vigorously because we're not. But I sort of feel that we're disservicing that generation and their teachers and their leadership, and ultimately, you know, the wider impact that has on society of the future, because we're not ready. And, you know, how will these kids thrive? I really ask myself lots of questions about it. And I also feel my generation is quite responsible for that. So not that I want to go on the guilt journey here.
No, I'm with you. Yeah. I'm with you. But do you think in that sense then that AI, and I'm going to say the pandemic as well, and I don't want to necessarily conflate the two, but they were catalysts and trigger points for us to reflect both on the role of digital in one hand and a kind of a sudden, very quick shift in what we experience in our lives and in the workplace. So the pandemic, maybe the biggest catalyst post-pandemic, was a change in that new hybrid landscape of working, which put more reliance on digital and other facets. And AI's kind of raised the question about, well, the more technology can do, the more we need to value those human skills. So it's put the focus on the skills agenda in terms of that curriculum that's been around since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution versus what does an employer actually want from people now and what gives a young person agency. I mean, are those the ones that resonate with you? I suppose more importantly, is that a consistent perspective around the world, or do you get different sense of people who are actually reacting to that?
I think the kind of employability is a big concern, and especially, you know, if you look at developing or emerging nations, and if you talk to people there, that's definitely what they've been focused on for years, because quite a lot of the time there's, you know, the population density, the competition is incredibly high, so the employability has been on those people's minds for years. And I would say that still resonates and is obviously now becoming a much more global concern. But I also feel it kind of skews the conversation a bit, because we kind of getting incredibly obsessed with the employability rather than actually who are these people and how are they going to live their lives. And of course, the workplace and employability is fundamental to that, but it's not everything. And I sort of feel if we kind of think of education purely as a gateway to employability, which is sort of the trend that I'm seeing, I find that quite dangerous, because then we, in a way, doing the same as the Russian education system did, but in a kind of slightly different guise. And we might bring, the sort of what we horribly call the soft skills into the debate, and we kind of talk about them sort of divorced from everything else, whereas they should be fully ingrained in everything we do, and in how, learning happens and what happens in the classroom. And, obviously the way we've constructed curricula does not cater for that kind of more holistic human development, if you like. Yeah.
Matt, that resonates with quite a few of your things, because what we often talk about is the curriculum's too full with the standardized approach to curriculum learning. So how do we tip something out to make space for the skills element to be there? Because, as you rightly say, it needs to be in the heart and soul of the curriculum, not an add-on when we think about skills. But there is this challenge, which is, I mean, I know you'll be aware now, OECD are focusing on this idea of adding in human flourishing and starting to recognise that understanding the quality of skills as part of a curriculum offer is something is absolutely needed. But how do you shift in the sense of, I guess if I was being a challenge, I'd say, what do we give up? Is it we just do less of some of the historical things? Or how do we find space to put skills at the heart of what we're doing?
I mean, in England, it was great difficulty, isn't it, really? I think we've had lots of conversations, lots of people who've said we need to talk about what education's about and what the function or the purpose of education is. And education as a catalyst for potential is the best thing I've heard so far. So I'm completely stealing that, Carl, and writing that down, to be honest with you. It's but it's all encompassing, isn't it? It doesn't actually say it's potential for maths, English. It could actually come into what I was just referencing there and say, actually, education should be there for the individual to meet their individual needs and to meet their potential, whether it's using technology, whether it's farming, whether it's whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I
mean, the soft skills thing, Alan, what we're trying to do in school here and other schools, and it is still niche schools across the country. I hate the term soft skills.
Yeah, me too.
And we've talked in the past, haven't we, about power skills and life skills and digital skills and things. And it almost feels like that by labelling them, you're making it harder to actually embed them in the curriculum. But in terms of what gives, I don't think, even I would argue that you can, in a primary education, the kids need those building blocks. Early years education is absolutely vital. And I couldn't do early years education. I couldn't be an early years educator. And I watch in awe what they plan and what they do and what they facilitate for the kids. And I think the first starting point for me should be that actually early years educators should be facilitating those digital skills. And that awareness of, misinformation, as daft as it sounds, which I know some countries, Norway teaches misinformation from 4, Estonia's started to embed it from early years, and you're thinking, that's what it is. But in terms of what gives, in terms of the English curriculum, we've just had the SATs test, and what a pile of crap it is. It really is. It's just nonsense, and it's learning knowledge, and it's just rote learning of stuff that you don't need. And I remember sitting, I can say it, on the SPAG test on Monday. One of the kids had to underline the relative clause in a question, and I'm thinking, what on earth is the point of that? And I think when we talk about what gives in the curriculum, there's certainly an argument that you've got to learn how to source the knowledge and check the knowledge and verify the knowledge. But do you have to actually memorise the knowledge? Do you, hell? And when you sort of take that approach, you reduce a huge amount of pressure on the curriculum and pressure from the curriculum on schools. So actually, we don't need to teach kids that they need to memorise every single date in history and every single capital city in geography, whatever the hell it is. But that would be my first approach, is you balance the skills and the knowledge training.
I also think, from sort of that we don't get enough conversation in the classroom. So, you probably know that I'm quite into the kind of dialogic things of, and that's also what we were talking about in Cambridge over the past 2 days, and the sort of the kind of art of conversation, because that is such a big catalyst for learning. But also, I'm also, convinced that we don't get kids to ask questions enough. And look at small children. What do? They ask questions all the time. They start going to school and it's like, hello, kids, now you're going to have to give us the answer. And it's sort of like, of course you need to sort of have the building blocks to create the answers. But if you are not equipped to start asking the right question, how can you get to the right answer except by regurgitating, what you get in the textbook and what the teacher tells you and what you have to memorize? But actually, in terms of memorization, if you can engage in that kind of dialogue and that questioning, you will memorize it anyway, and actually memorize it much better because it starts getting contextualized and applied.
I don't know if you remember, Al, that book I shared last year. One of our dads, Carla, wrote a book called The 12 Skills We're Using Technology, I think it's called. And it's called Graham Lee. It's very nice, but very good book. But we had a couple of days in school where we did the skills. Yeah. And we had one of the activities was speed chatting, where the early years, year sixes, who engage all the time but never actually talk, had to sit opposite each other for 5 minutes and just ask questions and talk to each other. And the first couple of sessions, first couple of 5 minutes, were quite awkward. And after that, when you watched them move, they were like, wow, it was like, bam. Because we never had that actual opportunity to sit and talk and learn about each other. And it was... And
there seems to be a common theme here, I see, and I think it's a really healthy one, that historically, I think we've delayed the point where we think a child is able to acquire certain skills and do things. And in reality, we're seeing much earlier that young people can be taught safe digital skills. We had Caroline Allams on the show, didn't we, Matt? And we're talking about, digital citizenship, digital safety. Those are skills that you can embed foundationally much younger. When it comes to that speech and listening, the oratory skills, the dialogic approach, the idea that that's the domain of older children, I think we're refining and saying actually they're the building blocks. And that then comes onto this, well, the world's changed. So where is the balance between, if we're aiming for student agency, we've got skills, we need to give them that context so that they've got a degree of knowledge to form. So they need numeracy and literacy, and that's really, really important. But at the same time, we can ask Siri or Alexa for most bits of information, or ChatGPT or any other thing. So we know we don't have to, by rote, as you would say, Matt, know every single fact, but we do have to have the skills to check whether the information we consume is correct. So we've changed now from remembering facts to validating information and its context. And I think that's where we had previous guests on where we've been talking about the curriculum review happening in the UK. And this idea, maybe, Carla, that it's just nibbling at the edges. If you start with the current one and you just try and tweak and reform, you don't actually get to that level of we need to start with a blank sheet of paper and actually fill the boxes. And I think that seems to be, from our guests, that consistent message, which is we've got to be bold on this. Otherwise, we're just going to continue tinkering.
I think, I totally agree with you, Alan. I think one of the biggest challenges that education has got, and especially in the kind of, because you want to give kids a safe environment in which they can learn, in which they can do all these things. And that's incredibly important. That has to remain the foundation stone, if you like. But the problem I see is that our world is so uncertain. Our world is moving so fast, yet education is so static. And that is, that tension is just getting bigger and bigger. And it's like this elastic band that's stretching to a level where it's going to snap. And it's going to snap into our face. And that's pretty painful. That is going to hurt a hell of a lot. And then what do we do? And if we lack those skills and kids can't kind of talk to each other with the right level of questioning and the right level of understanding and deepening that conversation, whether that's, applied in the workplace or wherever, and they just rely on ChatGPT to give them an answer to actually a really badly formulated question, then, we're in deep trouble. And I think for me, that is one of the biggest challenges we have got now in education. And to be honest, I think, EdTech has maybe even exacerbated that a bit, because it has retrofitted to that kind of model of education for a, not invalid reason, the wrong reason, but it's not invalid. And they were also forced to do that. But it's making that tension even bigger. And I think unless we, and of course that's not an easy message for policymakers who want to kind of instigate curriculum reform, because where do you start and how do you do it? And we haven't got all the answers. And of course policy wants to give the answers and wants to give, the kind of the framework and the sort of the guidance and guidelines in which this happens, because otherwise parents won't be very happy. And it's a very complex issue, I think. And education is messy, and it's now getting even messier because of all of this.
Do you think
it's definitely a complicated journey? One thing that we've talked about on previous ones is, there are different levers that we can pull. There is, without a doubt, not a political will for long-term change in education. We constantly have that reference point, and something I've written lots about in terms of we're looking at electoral cycles that limit those significant changes. And as a result, we sometimes see countries around the world that do not have regular democratic change of their governments being able to implement significant long-term changes, big planning for 2030, 2040 and so on, because there's consistency in political will. And so the only way we could achieve that here in the UK and the US and many Western countries is to take education off the political table and make it something that we have a different leadership that empowered to make those decisions. That for me feels the only way. You've got to have a devolved group. There may be some political oversight, but you've got to pass the baton to those that know and those that will be there consistently for, let's be realistic. We need a 10, 15-year plan. There's people, good folks like the Fed and others that have been saying the same thing, but it feels like otherwise, like you say, we're on an oil tanker, and the turning speed in education is being shown up more so now because we're seeing the turning speed of the workplace massively changing in a short window of time.
Yeah. I mean, over the past couple of days, I was in Cambridge, and I was part of a workshop. We looked at futures, right? And so in futures, you start doing all sorts of things. You do scenarios, but one of the interesting things there is you start looking at what we call the weak signals. And the weak signals they're kind of here today. You start extrapolating, you put a marker in, and you say, in the year 2040, we believe education may look like this or should look like this. And then you start sort of planning and scenario planning, and you start looking at actually what are the weak signals we see today that may influence that vision for 2040. And that we need to take into account in terms of how we sort of foresight and how we sort of build the scenarios for that. Now, these weak signals may be quite outlandish, but they're there, and we need to kind of engage with these weak signals. And I think that is not what we're doing. We're kind of looking at, there's a curriculum, and there's, we want to make sure that all the kids know STEM, that all the kids know how to code. Well, by the time the kids leave school, coding is out of the window for the vast majority of them. They need to understand that kind of computational thinking and how AI and these technologies might work at a kind of, a conceptual level. But what's the point of all of this is we kind of prepare these kids to be static individuals rather than adaptable and adaptive individuals that they need to be. And that, I think, is potentially the biggest societal problem we're going to have. And you see, like you were saying, Al, how some maybe less democratic regimes, but also the regimes that are sort of pushing for, innovation. They're pushing for innovation, and they're pushing for transformation of their country and sort of be on that innovation ladder of their country and or their region. And they're kind of leapfrogging all of us. You start seeing, what these nations are doing, and it's like, what the hell is going on in Europe, guys? We are digging our own grave. I mean, I've sort of been saying that for a very long time, but now that is definitely getting acute on every front, and it's unraveling.
I think it's connecting in very transient ways. We often have this conversation, and it's interesting how many folks have talked about that baseline of the education system and how it hasn't adapted. But economically, our barriers to independence and success economically were who had the best fleet and ships and transport and connectivity. Now in a digital world, every country can compete on a level footing online if there's the will and the intent. And so the natural disconnect that I see, and what you're saying absolutely resonates, Carla, is, we take the Cambridge context where you've been doing work for that future thinking. I have a role on the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority Board. Yeah. One of the biggest drivers from UK PLC and the government is we need economic growth, and this is one of our powerhouse regions on an international stage. Yeah. But economic growth doesn't happen if you just create the demand for jobs. If there aren't people in your community with the skills to fill those jobs, what you do is you create jobs that people from elsewhere around the world can fill remotely. And so this context of actually, if you've got a long-term economic plan, the skills acquisition plan, the education plan is what primes the pump. It's got to be done in conjunction. And at the moment, we've got this silo thinking. We need to grow our economy. Oh, we'll come back to the education system. We can't afford any change right now. Well, at some point, someone's going to say, we want to grow, but we just can't recruit anybody. And everyone's going to say, oh, hang on a minute. Give us 10 years and we'll catch up getting people skilled to fix the problem. Yeah. And I think that's where this joined up thinking is so critical.
Yeah. Well, education has always been very good at silos, hasn't it? I mean, even within itself. So you've got the policymakers, they don't necessarily talk to, the teachers very much, or the school leadership or the institutional leadership. You've got the researchers who do, fantastic work in research, but that conversation is also very disjointed from actually what education should be, and how we can kind of make it more adaptive to the world in which we live. So all those conversations are divorced, and people never really talk to one another or plan with one another, because you get certain skill sets involved and not others, and you usually don't ask very much of the people who are actually at the grassroots level of it, and certainly nobody ever asks learners anything. So which is also one of my kind of, I'm quite learner-centric. I constantly sit in conversations where everybody's talking about the teachers. And, of course, they should be talked about. Nobody's denying that. But there is who is ultimately the recipient of education. It's the learner. Who is education for? We forget to ask who it's for. And the why, and then, the how and the what. And they're pillar questions, and we never ask them.
Carla, on that point, one of the notes before the thing, Matt had written down that you're a champion of learner-centric design. I think we all get that, because I know it's something you've been passionate about. But in the context of AI, and this is a kind of an important topic, I think, because lots of us are kind of showcasing some early stage best practice, things that are happening with AI where it can have a positive impact, and it's all about measuring evidence of impact. But it's fair to say the majority are still very nervous about the role of AI in education. And I often see people are resistant to finding out, which is of concern to me, because if you find out and you're empowered and it's not right for your context, then so be it, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But in the context of learner-centric design and what you're passionate about, does the school and the teacher community's resistance to technological change actually create a greater risk for the learner in terms of their ability to not only learn, but project-based learning, skills acquisition, get them workplace ready?
Yeah, I think it does. And I'm not blaming the teachers at all in this, because that resistance is there for a reason. And we need to unravel that reason, I think, and new things can be very scary, and especially if you don't understand them. AI is, we know about it, but does everybody understand it? No, because even the experts no longer really understand it or are on the cusp of not understanding it. So that's really quite scary, because obviously it also sits at the opposite end of what we believe education should be, that kind of safe environment, right? That is certain. And this is all uncertain. So I will never blame a teacher for being resistant to that technology. However, if they are resistant, that means that we need to do something to at least, like you said, Al, if they don't want it and decide that it's not for them, at least if they know about it and have the right level of information, and that allows them also to experiment with it and then make that decision, then that's one thing. If the resistance is like, no, we're not going to do that because it's unsafe, it's X, Y, and Z, well, then I do kind of, not blame them, but I kind of go like, guys, you should really engage with this, because, and girls, of course. Sorry, Matt,
further, Carla. I'm of a firm opinion we are doing children of all ages a huge disservice if we aren't teaching these future skills. And absolutely. If educators don't understand it, then they get the training and the information and support to understand it. If they refuse to engage beyond that, then they need to step aside, because they're a barrier.
Exactly. And that's what I was going to get to as well, is like, teachers are saying, oh, well, AI will replace our job.
No.
Well, in certainly the foreseeable future, it will only replace your job if you don't engage with it.
Yeah. Because
then, like Matt said, then, you're not actually able to kind of do the job that you're meant to be doing. And that's then an issue. And I agree that, we need to kind of make sure that the teachers are kind of aware of what this does and upskilled. But actually, I also am convinced that to do that, we should allow for a level of experimentation, small scale and low risk experimentation, where the teachers and the, like, have sandbox or play AI playground afternoon once a week, where teachers and learners kind of go into the sandpit, and you you scaffold it, and teachers come up with a problem. You have to scaffold it. You can't just go willy-nilly, but you come in like, a problem statement for that activity. And teachers and kids learn together. It's not like, I'm going to teach you how to do this. We're going to experiment and explore. I know I've kind of hinted at the book by Rebecca Winthrop and Jenny Anderson on the disengaged teen. And, their conclusion is actually the best way to kind of engage the teens, and I think it applies well below and above teens, is that kind of explorer mode in education. Now, we've got an excellent opportunity here to kind of make that exploration happen. The key is to kind of, scaffold that exploration and not to introduce it in everything we do, but actually have that sort of time to experiment around. And it can be, if people are worried about the curriculum, you can associate it with something that is in the curriculum and put a problem around it, right? So it's a curriculum-based learning activity. In my book, shouldn't have to be at all, but, if that's a concern, it easily can be.
I love that. Perfect timing, because I covered that particular book in my newsletter this morning.
I saw, yes.
Now, when someone's reading and listening to this podcast, we may be a few weeks different, but I absolutely agree. I think it links in. And the scaffolding bit's an interesting one. We tend to, I believe, in education, we over-scaffold something, certainly when it comes to policy and administration. We tend to kind of be very focused on the knots rather than the cans. So I often share, speaking with schools and districts, an AI policy to get that. How do we start to move forward? That's a single sheet. In fact, it's a single slide. And people are like, well, I'm expecting it to be like a phone book because there's so much risk. But it's actually, that scaffolding starts with, we are empowering our staff to explore and play with a certain number of tools. These are the AI-based tools that we've done our background DPIAs on. Yeah. You can use them and try them, please don't upload personalized data unless it's something that we've already given agreement to. And if your output is more than 2 or 3 sentences, please cite it, reference it in your resources. But more importantly, if something works well, share it here. And if something works badly, share it here. And then collectively, we start to break down the silos. And we say for a term, for 2 terms, for 3 terms, across our school, willing staff are being empowered to try resources that might save them time, might give them a different approach, might differentiate things. But we're also capturing the evidence so that collectively we all learn and we grow with it. And I think that's the best way to then say, and a year from now, you can all come together and say, do any of these tools add value? But then you're doing it from your professional judgment, from an informed position, and you can decide. And I do very much support the mindset in that it's evidence-informed EdTech. And AI is just another educational technology that should be just considered as part of the toolbox. So I do think there's an element of we just need to empower people to use their professional judgment, when to use, when not to use.
Exactly. And I think what's also important here, and what's very easy here, because of course, we kind of harp on about evidence informed, and of course we need to know whether it works or not. But also some of this stuff is so new and evolves so fast that the evidence is not there. Are we then not going to do anything with it?
Thank you. Someone said it.
Because, I kind of get a bit fed up with we need the evidence, because it means we stay in the status quo, especially the way that people tend to look at evidence, right? But this, exactly. This actually allows you, through the activity and the sort of immediacy of it, you evaluate whether that works or not. You can't, but you give people the kind of agency to kind of do that self-evaluation. And that also applies to the learners, because what might work for the teachers, and that's why I kind of believe that they should do it in a co-creative environment, because then they really get the sense of like, this works. And it's not instructional, it's actually co-creative, it's a co-play environment, it's a co-exploration environment. And you do that in a safe environment, but we should give the space to do that. Otherwise we will never solve this problem. And AI is yes, it is a tool, but it's also much bigger than that, because it's kind of epistemic. And so our whole relationship with what knowledge is and what knowledge means for us is kind of going to go through a paradigm shift. And so that adds a kind of, for me, an extra dimension to this, which I find amazingly exciting. But one thing I also wanted to, and that's slightly deviating and we can come back to it, but I just wanted to put that just on the table right now, is that we also need to look at the kind of equality of distribution of this technology, because and that applies not just for emerging world, that applies in the UK or in Europe or everywhere.
In England, you've got the government coming out with AI tools for teachers, but you've got thousands of schools without a decent infrastructure, with no CPD, no devices. So should the government be actually saying we're not going to allow schools to use AI until we get this right, or should the government be facilitating at speed that digital infrastructure for all schools so they can all get that AI right as well? Because the gaps are just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Exactly. Yeah.
Schools with no tech and the schools using AI, it's going to be different worlds altogether, isn't it?
Yeah.
But we're not far off the point now, surely, in terms of human equity. When we talk about every person's right should be to have, power and water and a roof over their heads. But if we look in developed nations, we should be saying that actually there should be a standardized right that every child should have access to digital connectivity to allow them to learn and engage fairly and equitably in education. Because there's a whole other conversation there. What will education look like in 10, 20 years from now? Some of the best resources may well be hybrid, may well be online. They may well be more that we break down those geographical barriers with better digital tech. But that all ties in with the equity piece. It's the same conversation we're talking. I covered this morning. One of the other topics was about using AI to monitor exam rooms, to replace the exams officer for students taking exams. And I'm thinking, well, apart from that, I think it's actually quite nice having a human being in that space in a very stressful environment for learners. The bigger question is, when are we going to figure out that actually taking young people and saying we want you to all go in the sports hall and sit in rows and do these paper tests is probably not going to get the most out. Exactly.
Honestly, if that's how we
getting out of the room, not how we monitor it better.
That conversation reminded me of something Caroline Keep shared out, where they used AI to track the football in a football match. And the linesman had a bald head, and a few minutes in, the AI started focus on the linesman's bald head, and it followed the linesman's bald head for the rest of the game instead of the football. All that happened in an exam room as well.
This is the same old thing, which is just one example, but we're thinking one step ahead. How do we reduce workload in this current setting? That rather than 5 steps ahead, saying this current setting isn't appropriate. And then we say, well, we should be letting our learners engage and do their exams digitally. And the problem with the digital persuasion is not the capability of the technology. It's the fact that most schools haven't got significant, consistent equipment to facilitate that for all their learners. So rather than say we're underfunded from a capital supply to all of our education system, it's easier to say, well, we need to review and research whether digital's the way to go. You know?
It's also, I think the question is... Oh, sorry, Matt. Go
you go.
I think the question needs to be more radical, to be honest, because it's bigger than that. It's like, whether our exam system is suited, and that's probably for another podcast. But it does connect to the rest of the question, because how do we look at kind of assessment, and in this new paradigm, and what does that mean? And that means, you can't, because otherwise we're just going to look at AI as another sort of retrofitting tool. And that's not what AI is about. AI is really about changing things. And if we say we're going to use, for your example, we'll just have an AI fat controller in the room. Seriously, what is all that about?
I saw a perfect little graphic which was just showing a bridge between two kind of across a canyon, and you basically have the context of you've got your teaching and you've got your learning, and assessment is your bridge that allows you to identify and model the progress of learning. And on that simplistic level, we can all kind of go, well, yeah, that's what teachers are doing in real time the whole time.
Yes, exactly.
But it's the point where we lump into that whole conversation. So because we agree that assessment is needed to allow the professional in the room to adapt and teach in the right ways for the learner, that we can slide all the way to the end and say, so high stakes assessment, where we say, remember everything for 3 years and then we'll test you, somehow gets lumped into the approved bucket as well. And for me, it's as we move to the high-stakes testing that we cease the equity of, but that doesn't work for every kind of learner. That's not.
No, absolutely not. And also, who is that high stakes for? Let's be honest with ourselves. Who is it really for?
It's a stick schools with.
Yeah, exactly. And we have got the means to sort of be quite clever at assessment and sort of do that on an ongoing basis. AI can do that to a level that is actually quite scary, so we don't want to go to that end of the scale. But it shouldn't be about that determined point in a child's life at a particular age, and now you're going to do these horrible things called GCSEs in this sports hall. What is this? What is this? What are we doing to? Some kids are very good at that and they deal with it, and I think a little bit of sort of difficulty and surmounting some difficulties is not always a bad thing for a child to have to do. But this is not the way to do it. And you're also, a lot of kids are very bad at these situations, and they might be the brightest and the most able kids in terms of that potential that they've got, but they can't realize it because they get judged on that moment in time, and even more, they get predicted to get it's the prediction of you're going to be a B and you're going to be a C, and hey, you're going to be an A double star. Honestly, what is this?
On that point, we had Professor Mick Waters in, didn't we, Matt, for an episode a few ago, and he was just talking in the sense of how we do our assessments and output for GCSEs. It is like starting a swimming race and saying 40% of the kids we're expecting to drown, not get to the other side of the swimming pool, because we will always measure it so that there is a fixed quotient of failure. And you do kind of look and think, well, this is a system that was originally set up for the universities to give them a mechanism to measure an input and flow into their academic process. And it's just like we've revised everything else in the world, and this is just stuck. Rather than us looking at, is there a better way? I mean, Matt shared before on micro credentials and other ways we could capture, and frankly, even just professional teacher assessed grades to me have much more value in the context of
100%.
observational and professional judgment.
Why do we accept it as educators? Why do we put up with this nonsense year on year?
Yeah. I agree, Matt. And you know what the irony really is about, the universities, kind of their throughput and the flow into them. The kids still arrive at university and the universities go, oh my God, these kids are so not ready for university. And then, but seriously, it's a conversation I hear all the time. And then, they go to the workplace, and what does the workplace say after they leave university? Oh my God, these kids are so unready for the workplace. So what are we doing? What are we doing?
It's It's right. Listen, I'm conscious of time, Matt. I probably have hogged some of the questions here because there's so many things we could talk about. I'm going to hand across to you for a kind of what's the one hot topic we've missed that you want to pick Carla's brain on?
I'm very lucky. I love my Saturday mornings nowadays because I learn so much. Well, I usually come away angry at the whole system, but I want to, months ago, Carla, you shared something on LinkedIn with me called about neuroplasticity or something.
Yes.
And I remember having to think, oh, hell, what's neuroplasticity mean? I went away and I've learned about neuroplasticity, but I did it with my year 5-6 class.
Excellent.
As part of using Gemini. They sussed it out before we used Gemini, Neuro is brain, plasticity means it doesn't break, so it must be something bendy brains. You've got it, kids. And I've actually got this bizarre system now where the kids, that's resonated them because I think it's the first time they've been shown how to use AI. So every time I talk to my year 5-6 class now about something, I've seen them several times sit back and say, I need to make sure that I'm doing this properly because it's going to shape my thinking. I'm neuroplastic and neuroplasticity. And you think, these are your 10 and 11-year-olds. So actually, when we talk about speaking to learners, kids are so competent and aware of technology nowadays. We need to talk at 5-6 years old upwards, if not younger, because I just sit there in awe at times listening to kids talk about neuroplasticity now. And being aware of how it is, things are shaping their thinking. And
I mean, this is brilliant, Matt, because, the whole kind of neuroplasticity and how our brain works, and if we can get kids enthused about it, you can get them more curious about learning.
But just if they're aware of it, if they're aware of it, then just the ethics as well within that. It's
exactly. And the funny thing is, it also allows you to kind of get a really good segue to discuss AI, also for teachers, because obviously AI was kind of inspired by our brain. The design of AI was inspired by, how the brain works. And we talk about neural networks and all these things. So actually a good segue for teachers is also kind of, and we should do that more with teachers as well. It's like, how does our brain work? And because there are so many neuromyths about learning styles, about left side, right side, and actually our brain is very, we are very plastic in our brain, and the more we use it, the more we develop that neuroplasticity. And as a kind of explanation of AI, using that analogy of, do you know how the brain works? And suddenly, if you talk to kids about how the brain works, their curiosity levels kind of shoot up.
Well, they've all kept it. They've all sort of realised that the more we do something, the more it shapes how we do it in the future. One of the things this year that's sort of several things this year that you think have been brilliant. None of them are national curriculum related, I have to say. One of the little things you think, if the kids can hang on to that, actually, that awareness, if nothing else, is going to stand them in fantastic stead for learning.
The examples you give, though, Matt, we've seen a massive rise in project-based or problem-based learning and how that actually is really positive in terms of student and learner engagement. Your example there, getting the learners involved, let's learn it and figure it out together, is a perfect example of when...
sandbox, playground.
It is exactly that. It's a sandbox, it's a playground, there's a purpose. Why are we doing this? We can see there's a purpose to this. It's interesting, and it's aligned with something that's real and tangible for us. And if we kind of have that little cycle of checklist on all the different things that we were able to engage with, just imagine how much more impactful and fun it would actually be to acquire knowledge at any age and stage. I mean, I think I learn more now as I get older than I did when I was young, probably because I'm more receptive to admitting that I don't have all the answers.
I mean,
exactly. That's the same for me. Absolutely.
That one post from Carla to 5-6 about neuroplasticity, and SATS week, which is going to have more impact on them, or more value to them, might be a better way of putting it. And it sure as hell ain't SATS week.
No, I think we're with you. Sorry, Carla.
To that point, we give the kids curriculum and the stuff they need to learn that is in the curriculum. We never explain to kids how learning actually happens. And if they understood a bit more about that, and of course we don't know everything about how learning really, but we know pretty much foundationally how learning happens. And if we started by explaining that a bit more to kids and teachers, to be honest, then that kind of engagement with learning will also change and shift. And if you talk to a kid about, did you know that how your brain can, how it does that? They kind of go like, oh, really? And suddenly it becomes like something very, very different in terms of the engagement with that sort of with learning and education and yeah. Mm-mm.
Well, I think we've proven the golden rule, Matt, which is whenever we get really cool, interesting people on the show, we can go on for hours and hours and hours. Carla, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sharing and informing. I can see Matt's got cogs whirring, lights flashing, loads of ideas to take away. And I absolutely would like to pre-invite you to come back, hopefully later in the year. And
I'd love to. Anytime. You just let me know.
You share so much that in some cases, as you know, I've commented, you've shared some things that I've had to go away and read 3 times to fully understand.
Same for me, though. I have to read it 3 times when I write it. So.
But formally, thank you for stretching and challenging my thinking on things, because I really, really value the stuff that you do. My Aerts alerts I do, and all sorts of little things I try and share. But it's been brilliant to have you on the show. Thank you for your support.
Thanks,
and we look forward to having you on the show.
You're very welcome.
Again.
And give me a shout anytime if I can do anything, Matt. And if you want to have a chat, just
always.
shout.
I'm going to message you straight after this.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And that's the end of another episode.
All right. Have a good weekend.